by Gary Oldman. Abandoned by William Clark Russell. Chapter 7. The Boat's Crew. Came September 14, 1891, a bright, cool morning, making it 7 months and rather more since Captain Francis Reynolds was flung ashore, bruised, bleeding, and insensible on the uninhabited island of Santos Cristos, there to languish, during which time he had never once set eyes on a sail of a ship or the smoke of a steamer by day, whatever may have passed in the night. He knew not the day nor the month. In 7 months he had not spoken. No, there was not even a dog nor a parrot for him to address. Sometimes in the beginning he would speak aloud to himself, fearful lest his voice should perish by disuse. But he neglected this custom later on and never broke the silence, not even when he put up a prayer for mercy and deliverance. He was now presenting the most grotesque and uncouth appearance that could be imagined. His hair had turned grey and streamed far down his back, like that of the Welsh bards of yore. A considerable beard had grown, and his cheeks and his mouth and half of his breast were concealed by hair. His left eye was dim and stained, and his vision was so weak that when he looked through it alone, closing the other eye, he could barely distinguish the outline of a tree 50 feet distant. And all about that side of his head was the puckered flesh and distorted bone and defacing wound. He was much burnt by exposure to the sun, but the mahogany was not the healthy brand of the sky and sea blistered sailor. There was mixed with it a sort of ashiness, which produced a complexion impossible to convey in words. His clothes and boots were sadly broken. Unhappily, the shoes in the sea chest were too small for him. He presented indeed a most melancholy, shocking figure, stooped, suggesting by attitude and motion a perpetual hopelessness at heart that would have moved the most soulless to witness. On the morning named, he left the fissure, which he had continued to occupy, having outlived the trouble of the ghost who had never again appeared, and made his way slowly to the Horseshoe River, where he drank and washed, and then came back to the cave, where lying in the shovel were some cutlets of cooked fish. He took one and sat down outside the cave and began to eat. Whilst he was eating, he chanced to cast his eye up at the slope above the dell and beheld a man. The man stood looking at him. He wore a fur cap and sleeved waistcoat and pilot cloth breeches. The arm with which Reynolds was feeding himself was blasted as though struck by lightning. The whole man was turned into an inimitable effigy of stone. The morning, as had been said, was bright and cool. The splendor of the sun was far-reaching. The life of the earth, of the ocean, of the heavens was in the bending and swaying of plants, in the movement of the boughs of the trees, in the sparkling fall of cataracts, in the resounding organ notes of the sea, in the speeding of clouds. Yonder, then, surely was no ghost. "Hallo!" shouted the man. "Who are you down there?" Then turning, he bawled with the sharp of his hand at his mouth, "I say, mates, there's a man down there, eating his breakfast, looking as though he belonged to the island." Then again addressing himself to Reynolds, he cried, "Are you English? How long have you been here?" And with that he stepped out to approach him. Even as he walked, the forms of several other men appeared on the rise which he had quitted. Reynolds rose. The piece of fish he was eating fell. He was trembling violently. His features worked as though he in convulsion. As the man approached him, a wild smile irradiated his face as though a beam of electric light had been passed over it, and he dropped upon the ground in a fit. The men were collected about him were 7 in number. 6 were manifestly sailors. The 7th was a strange and striking-looking personage, about 6 feet tall, broad, and so stout about the chest that he seemed to be padded. He was bearded and looked about 50 years of age. He had a large, full, mild face, rather protruding eyes, bland, like a cow's, with intellect and thought in their residual expression. "Has he dropped dead for the joy at the sight of us?" said one of the sailors. "I've heard of such things." "How long has he been here, I wonder?" said another. "Turn him over," exclaimed the tall man, pronouncing these few words with great deliberation and slight Irish accent. "Poor fellow," he exclaimed, looking at Reynolds, whose face, though calm in the oblivion of the brain, was pregnant with pathos and the appealing expression the spirit of solitude had chiseled upon it. "Is he dead, sir, do you think?" said a man. The tall personage stooped and felt Reynolds' wrist and said, "No, I guess by his appearance that he's been here many weeks." "Why, ain't that a cave?" said a man. "That's the pit he uses for cooking," exclaimed another. 3 or 4 of the sailors left Reynolds to the tall men, and 2 who stayed and entered the cave. They peered in wearily, then entered. They blinked a bit before they could fairly see, and then one said, "See, that's their shovel. Gord's life, that's how he cooked his food. See the bits of fish in it? Bullies." "A regular castaway, and no blooming mistake," said another. "Here's his old chest," cried one, "with his letters cut on it. Why, whoever sees a chest like this nowadays? How old is he?" "Why, this old chest's all of 100 years old, you lay." He opened the lid. As we know, Reynolds had removed the clothes. "Why, see here," continued the man, taking up one of the buckled shoes. "This is what they wear when they dress up for old men in stage plays. Shoes of this pattern hadn't been worn for a century. And look at this old gun lying down there," exclaimed another. "My grandfather had a piece like that, and it belonged to his grandfather. So how old is that gun, I should like to know?" "Ain't that a yarn," said a man, "about a Dutchman who fell asleep upon the top of a mountain when he was young and came down bald with a long beard and found everybody he had known dead and gone years and years. There wasn't even anybody as he might have owed money to alive to ask him for it." A man lifted the lid of the shelf. "What's this?" said he, picking up a guinea. It was examined by the others, whilst the first man scrutinized the silver. "It's good money," said a man. "More here than a month's pay by a long chalk. The dating of it'll tell you how old it is. What's the latest number?" "Here's a bit marked in 1801, explained the sailor, talking in the better light at the mouth of the cave. "Poor old man," said the others. They replaced the money and went out. Reynolds was just then coming to. He was fetching his breath with difficulty and opening and shutting his eyes. "There's evidence in that cave, Mr. Goodhart," said the sailor in the sleeved waistcoat and fur cap, "that this man can't be less than 130 years old." "What do you mean?" asked one of the men who had stayed. "Go and look for yourself," was the answer. "There's a musket that's over 100 years old. His sea chest just as ancient. The youngest of his money is marked 1801. Reynolds opened his eyes, gave 2 or 3 gasps, made an effort to sit up, was helped by the man who had been called, Mr. Goodhart, into a sitting posture, rolled his eyes with tokens of astonishment and of a spirit kindling into transport, tried to speak, muttered water, and then continued to stare around upon the men. "Where's fresh water to be got?" asked the man in the waistcoat. Reynolds pointed to the cascades. "What's it to be brought in?" continued the man. It did not seem that Reynolds could speak until he had drank. One went to the cave and came back saying there was nothing that could hold water in it. "Run down to the boat for the soup and bully can, one of you," said Mr. Goodhart. A man procured this can, went into the river, and returned. During his absence, the sailors, who thought Reynolds 130 years old, gazed at him with the emotions of a boy who views a mummy. The man who brought the water exclaimed, "Oyster shells had been used for drinking with down at that river, a blamed sweet river. It begins up there. said he, pointing at the Cascades, and it's like watching fire engines a-playing. Go and taste it. Nicest drop of water I ever swallowed. Whilst this was being said, Reynolds drank, and the draught liberated his voice. He strained his sight at the only piece of sea that was visible from the place they occupied, and said, "Where's your ship?" "At the bottom of the sea," answered Goodhart, and then with a singularly cordial manner, very gentle and charming, with kindness, he said, "Pray, what might be your name?" "Francis Reynolds." "How long have you been here?" Reynolds struggled with his memory and replied, "I have lost all tally of weeks." "Today," said Goodhart, "is September 14th, 1891. "My ship," answered Reynolds, "was lost, and I was cast ashore here on February 2nd, 1891. Silently and secretly computing, he was overwhelmed by the magnitude of his time of loneliness. "What was your ship?" "The Flying Spur." "A steamer?" "No." "Were you a passenger?" "I was her master." At this the sailor stared at him with an attention which was tinctured with visible colour of respect. "Her master," explained Goodhart. "Are you the only survivor?" "The only survivor." Life was brisker in him now, and memory quickened, and he began to talk. There had been times when he believed he should, by long enforced silence, lose the power of articulation. He spoke well, with fluency, for this man, through reading and reflection, was a master of an ample vocabulary. The sailors knew that they were in the presence of a gentleman and an educated man, and they ceased to think him 130 years old. Goodhart followed the narrative with sympathy and earnest attention. "The life belt I came ashore in is somewhere about," said Reynolds. "My ship's name is on it. What's your story?" "I'm going for a drink of fresh water," said a sailor. "What's there good to eat on this island?" asked the man in the sleeved waistcoat. "Plenty of fish and oysters. No fruit nor vegetables, saving mushrooms," answered Reynolds. "What's your story, sir?" The man went roaming off in ones and twos, and Goodhart sat down beside Reynolds. "We have not been arrived above an hour," said he. "I was a passenger in the ship, and the only passenger. She was the barque Esmond, of 900 tons, bound from Sydney to Valparaiso, and thence to San Francisco. Her captain was a man named Mordaunt, and his wife and child were on board. But I was the only passenger in the sense of paying for the cabin. I was at sea when a boy. My health needed a successive change of climates, so, knowing Mordaunt, who was a very good fellow, I hired a cabin in the Esmond, intending to make my way from San Francisco to New York, and so to England. 3 days ago we were in a collision with a large steel sailing ship, which cut us down on the starboard bow and made off in the gloom of the evening and vanished. The water gained upon us, but we held on till yesterday evening, when the ship was within half an hour of foundering. This gave us time to lower the boats and stock them. The captain went with his wife and child and a little crowd. There was another boat and ours. The man who fetched the water for you was the boatswain. We lost sight of the other boats in the night, and this island shone out upon us this morning when the sun rose. You have been 7 months here," he added, looking slowly round him. "Am I to believe that no ship has ever come within sight of this island in all that time?" "I vow to God," answered Reynolds, "that I have not once caught sight of a sail or smoke." "But surely," said Goodhart, "an island almost directly in the way of the course shaped by vessels bound from Australia to South Chilean ports must often be passed by ships." "Never have I seen one," cried Reynolds, "though conceive the sort of lookout a man in my situation would keep." Goodhart looked very pensive. Reynolds cried rapturously in a sudden hurry of joy. "How often have I exclaimed to myself, if I had but one to speak to," and laying hold of Goodhart's hand, he bowed his head. Goodhart viewed the poor fellow with a most noble and touching expression of pity that seemed to lie upon his face like a sort of holy light, as though there was something divine in the spirit within him, and that shone in his face as one could conceive of a saint or of the Redeemer. Goodhart viewed the poor fellow with a most noble and touching expression of pity that seemed to lie upon his face like a sort of holy light, as though there was something divine in the spirit within him, and that shone in his face as one could conceive of a saint or of the Redeemer, not to speak profanely when he addressed soothing words. Reynolds released his hand, and Goodhart looked towards the cave, asked, "Do you sleep here?" "No. My bed is yonder in a crack in the embankment of that dell. This island has been occupied. I found some old relics of human habitation in that cave." "How have you lived?" "I have taken fish and drank that water," answered Reynolds, directing his eye at the Cascades. "When do you mean to start?" "I shall not trust my life to an open boat," answered Goodhart. "This is solid land, and I intend to remain to be taken off." Reynolds looked startled. "You will not surely remain alone here?" "1,000 times over, sooner than take the risk of an open boat. Consider," said Goodhart, speaking with great deliberation, with a slight Irish accent. "When we were in the boat, we found that she was without mast or sail." "Ho!" explained Reynolds. "We hailed the nearest boat to be taken in tow, but I don't think she heard us. The night came along so fast that until the moon shone, the sea absorbed the boats like bits of ebony afloat on ink. Next, our breaker held 6 gallons only. Now you are one of us, and think of what a breaker containing 6 gallons for 8 men in a rowing boat and a great ocean to measure. Think what such a thing signifies." "But I beg your pardon, sir. You are a sailor." "I quite agree with you. The risk is enormous," said Reynolds, "but surely it is preferable to this imprisonment." "No, because I am quite certain that ships do at times come within sight of this island," said Goodhart, mildly but firmly. "It is a coincidence that nothing should have appeared during your stay here. Probably within the next few days something may come along and take us off. My heart is weak. I have suffered for years from that organ and shall die of it, if nothing else kills me. Exposure, the horrible suffering of thirst would make haste to do their work with me, and I shrink from the idea of my body being thrown over the gunwale of the boat by those sailors, and I have my reasons for choosing a possible sentence of imprisonment here that may run into months, rather than take my chance in an open sailor's boat with 7 comrades and a beaker of 6 gallons. And what to eat to last us if we are not soon picked up, or make the land? We must rig up a mast," said Reynolds. "Where's the sail to come from?" exclaimed Goodhart. "The sailors must stitch their shirts together," answered Reynolds. "Have you got needles and thread here?" "None." "Nothing in which fresh water could may be stored?" Reynolds considered and answered, "Nothing." "The sight of these waterfalls makes me thirsty," said Goodhart, who rose and walked with Reynolds to the bank of the river where the bright water foamed. Here Reynolds had placed several large oyster shells for his own conveniences, and these made good sources for dipping and drinking. The men had drank and had lounged down to the beach for oysters and shellfish. "This is delicious water," exclaimed Goodhart. "It sinks sweet and cold to one's very marrow, like the flavour of a banana after a long voyage." "Ah, I have found it sweet and a good medicine," exclaimed Reynolds. "A few weeks ago I received an ugly visit from an old friend of mine, Mediterranean fever. I might guess my own temperature about 104, and a slow pulse, not the pulse of fever, and a weary throbbing headache, and a thirst which scarcely those waterfalls," said he, looking up, "were able to quench. And with the chance of that fever recurring at any moment, as its habit is," said Goodhart, "you would trust yourself in a boat without sails, containing 8 men and a beaker of 6 gallons?" Reynolds looked down upon the ground thoughtfully. There could be no doubt that his mind had been weakened by solitude and suffering, mental and physical, and he was in a state when he was to be swayed, and not with difficulty. There had been a time, it would have been the same with him now had he been alone, when could it have been said to him, "There is an open boat in the fishing creek of yours. She is without mast or sail, and in her bow is a little cask that holds 6 gallons of fresh water." He would have fried fish in his shovel with incomparable dispatch, hove into the boat, afraid of oysters and mushrooms, if the season yielded them, and had gone away with a hymning heart, taking its chance by sculling her out to drift into a deliverance, taking its chance of the most lonely, the most God-forsaken death a man can die, sooner than remain locked up, a broken, solitary, speechless, and hopeless prisoner in this island solitude. "I should like to look into that cave," said Goodhart, and together they went in. Goodhart entered and gazed about him as a man might who inspects a room he has a mind to rent. When the sight was used to the gloom, Goodhart examined the contents of the shelf in the chest, peered at the little bundle of clay pipes, looked at the old musket and buckled shoes. "It makes one think of the old buccaneers," said he. "I should say, with you, the date is about 1800. They did not maroon men then, though it is true that the captain of a man-of-war sent a seaman named Jeffries ashore to perish as fast as he could. He was rescued, and did well on the merits of his sufferings. Who was the owner of this chest?" said he, viewing the letters on the lid. "I remember at Bath Abbey looking down upon the pavement and seeing a memorial stone for which the lettering had been totally effaced, saving the single word Esquire, ESQ. Of such is the pomp and importance of a man. I once saw the owner of this chest walking in the dell by the moonlight," said Reynolds. "The bushes made a shadow, but no shadow walked with the man. He never again returned, and I was glad." "Oh, what can equal loneliness as a vision breather?" exclaimed Goodhart. "And yet," he continued gravely, regarding the old sea chest, "I don't know, Captain Reynolds, why the illusions of the brain should be more unreal than the ideas we receive from our sensations. We are beset with mysteries vaster and more profound than ghosts. They are so familiar that few give them thought. Yet though we walk in the sunshine, no man knows what brightness is, no man what heat is. We slumber, but no man knows what sleep is. We don't know why the invented image upon the retina should be accepted right side up by the brain. We believe that time is a thing measurable by the flight of the heavenly bodies, and that it would cease if the sun stood still. But we do not know what fills the interval, sun or no sun, between our leaving a chair and reaching a door, or quitting Liverpool and arriving at Boston." This was a form of speculation very much in Reynolds' way, and he watched the speaker with interest. "Where do you catch fish?" said Goodhart. Reynolds replied, and they walked together to the creek. A boat of a whaling pattern lay snug in the little harbour, betwixt the fishing rock and the shore. Reynolds started at the sight of her. "Oh, my God," he explained softly. "How often I have dreamt of such a thing." "The open boat stands next to the raft in my catalogue of direst horrors of the deep," exclaimed Goodhart. "A man in the boat handling provisions to the rest of the fellows ashore, one or two of whom were already seated and eating. Those stood up when Goodhart and Reynolds approached. Presently the whole company was seated and eating. They had drunk plentiful and did not want water. To Reynolds, after months of oysters and fried fish, the tinned meat and ship's biscuits were delicious. "I beg pardon," said the waistcoated man, whom we shall call Boatswain. "Do you catch your fish with hooks and lines?" Reynolds explained how he caught fish, and added that he would catch some for them presently. "Please, Captain, how far off's Chile?" inquired a sober-looking young sailor. "All 300 miles, answered Reynolds. "What are the ports, sir?" asked another, for Reynolds had been a master of a ship, and these seamen naturally looked up to him as a navigator. "Santiago, Valdivia, Valparaiso, and some smaller ports," was the reply. "Ain't Joan Fernandez knocking about close by somewhere?" inquired the boatswain. "It's as distant as the coast of Chile from this island," responded Reynolds. "How are you going to make a port without a sail?" said Goodhart. "My answer to Mr. Goodhart was, 'Let the men take their shirts,'" said Reynolds, "and connect them into a sail with fibres of creepers." "I'm afraid," said the boatswain, with a slow shake of his head, "that such a sail 'ud blow away from its yard in the first bit of wind like smoke from a baccy pipe." "Have you got a compass?" asked Reynolds. "No," answered Goodhart. "How are you going to find your way along?" inquired Reynolds. Goodhart shrugged his shoulders. "By the sun and by other bodies in the heavens, as others had done in their day," said the boatswain. "I'm for keeping all fast and giving ourselves a chance of a ship passing and making for her in the boat," said a sailor. "Yes," exclaimed Goodhart, with a warm nod of approval. "But," said the boatswain, "here's Captain Reynolds been 7 months and never sighted a vessel, though I reckon you kept a sharp lookout, sir. I climbed that hill 2 or 3 times a day." "A lookout? But my sight is not as it was." "You see," said a sailor, "that we are shipwrecked men. I've lost all but what I'm a-sitting in, and I want to go ashore and begin again. I don't take on to the notion of tarning crab or cockle, and that's what a man becomes who lives without wages or clothes or a house in the islands of this shore." Murmurs of approval attended this delivery. "I'll show you how to catch fish," said Reynolds. He fetched his fishing line and landing basket, which he kept snug in a little hole on the mainland, and showed the men what they were made of. He took his meteorite and hammered off the requisite bait. Goodhart and the sailors watched him with profound interest. This was the product of bitter experience, the reality of human need and suffering on nature's own stage. No delusive coinage of imagination such as a dramatist might introduce in a sea play. A fish took the bait readily, and Reynolds landed a 20-pounder of the cod species in his basket, to the admiration of the seamen. "It bloomed clever," said one of them. "Derned if I should have thought of it." "Is it your own idea, Captain?" inquired Goodhart. "The Patagonians fish like this," was the answer. "A couple of you had better turn to," said the boatswain, "and cut lines after that pattern, and I'll make another landing bank, which'll be enough." Nothing more was said about stopping or going. The boatswain asked Reynolds if there was a piece of sailcloth in the cave, or any other stuff in the island fit to make a sail of. Reynolds told him there was not a rag except the old cloak that wrapped him at night and the clothes they wore. Some now went to work to make lines. 1 or 2 searched the island for anything that might prove useful to them, particularly for anything in which water might be stored for a boat voyage. But Reynolds could have easily told them that this quest must prove worthless. He and Goodhart went to a green slope under a tree and sat down. The autumn vegetation clothed the island with many beautiful and some glowing tints. The season's growth of mushrooms was plentiful. Wildflowers with petals blue and crimson and orange blew a small fragrance into the air. Reynolds again took notice of the peculiar bulkiness of Goodhart's figure. It was as though he wore stays or was padded. His attire consisted of a yachting cap, a double-breasted round cloth cloak, and dark cloth trousers. He wore a wedding ring on his little finger and a large signet ring on his right forefinger. When he seated himself now, he unbuttoned his coat, and discovered a dark red waistcoat with gilt buttons. A heavy gold chain lay upon it, and when he drew out his watch, Reynolds saw that it was fine and very valuable gold timepiece. "I never thought," said Goodhart, "that I should be wrecked on a desolate island. I believe I hankered after something of the sort when I was a boy. You have been sharing the experiences of Robinson Crusoe. To what degree does your practice correspond with Defoe's imagination?" "I should have been glad," answered Reynolds, "had a ship been stranded within rafting distance full of everything that I wanted. It is easy for writers of romances to oblige their castaways by wrecking ships, not only to feed and clothe, but to put plenty of money in their pockets. Your reckoning makes out that I have been here 7 months, and I have never caught sight of even the royals of a ship, and no more smoke than you can now see." "You missed Man Friday," said Goodhart. "Yes," said Reynolds with a faint smile. "I could have put up with somebody to fish with, to have made signs to, even if he no speakee. Are you married, sir?" Reynolds slightly bowed. "Any children, may I ask?" Reynolds gravely shook his head. "A wife in England, waiting and hoping." "Ah," said Goodhart, with a face of abstraction, as though he thought aloud. "None but the sufferer know the pathos, the pang of the heartache, the depth of human sigh, the bitterness of human tear contained in that one awful word, missing. But, Captain Reynolds, I have faith in the direction of the drift, and in the issues of life. It does so happen at the end that things have shaped themselves for our good. If you are spared to look back upon this incident of your career, you will find a circumstance of good in it, a gem set in a crown of thorns and nettles, which you could have done without, and would not have forfeited for 20-fold more of suffering than you have endured. Are you married, Mr. Goodhart?" "This was her ring," Goodhart answered, taking between his thumb and forefinger the wedding ring on his little finger. "It was enlarged to fit me. It was her wish that I should wear it and be buried in it. She died in childbed. I am as absolutely alone, Captain, in this wide universe of correlations as you were yesterday." "It's the happiest state of life," exclaimed Reynolds. "Nobody to work for, nobody whose future must be your bitter business, nobody who by misconduct could disgrace your honourable name, nobody to... He looked away to the miles of ocean recess, into the miles of hollow blue there, and the figure of Lucretia shaped itself before his mental vision. He started, and found Goodhart observing him intently. "Is that an old scar, Captain, at your eye?" "No. When I came to after being flung ashore here, I found my brow cut and bleeding, and my mouth injured. The blow has affected the sight of the damaged eye, and it may be, I hope it may be, that ships hull down have passed and I have not seen them. I have tried to catch a sight of myself in a pool of water, but never could distinguish such an image as could give me the view I want. Am I much distorted?" "That could only be answered by one who knew you before you were injured. You have grown a fine length of hair," said Goodhart, with his placid, kindly smile. "I venture to say you did not give that fathom of locks to the breeze on your quarter-deck." "Nor this," said Reynolds, grasping his beard. "If you stay here, time will adorn you too." "I am not to be disturbed by the idea of hair," said Goodhart. "Nothing shall induce me to venture my life in that boat we arrived in. Good heavens, look what a mighty surface the ocean is. What a contemptible atom, a microscopic monad, is an open boat, a vibrio of the deep which the passing telescope shall easily miss. Now it is a fact, whether credible or not, that when these two men's conversation had reached this point, it was interrupted by a fellow who was halfway up the hill of Cascades, bellowing as though for his life. while he flourished his hand in ecstasy of gesture in the direction of the southeast horizon. "Sail ho! Sail ho!" he bawled, in a note that fell as clear upon the ear as the song of a lark in the sky. Reynolds sprang to his feet. "What's that he says?" he shouted, rounding to look up at the man. "Sail ho! Sail ho!" yelled the fellow, and some figures of his shipmates went scrambling up to him. "Go and judge for yourself, Captain Reynolds," said Goodhart. "My weak heart will not allow me to attempt that hill." End of chapter 7. Recording by Gary Oldman, Middletown, New York.